Good afternoon, Mr. Seabourne.
Aye.
Mr. Connell.
Thank you, Lord. I just want to, if I can, Mr. Seabourne, get to the end of this exercise about the design process. You've told us what you thought the user groups should have been doing or could have been doing, and we've discussed that. I'm not going to go back over that part of the evidence. And we then moved on to the suggestion that, well, assuming ventilation and design, and let me be clear when I ask this question, I'm talking about things like air change rates, pressure gradients, absence of chilled beams, the kind of things we saw in the 4B clinical output specification, although they didn't put ACH in it, but that kind of thing. The prospect that these were being capable of being reviewed or discussed other than in the user groups. Now, I think you'd started to tell us that the people who had the expertise to do that were, as you put it, you. I just want to go through this. David Hall told the inquiry that he had neither the expertise to do this, nor was it his role. Now, is he right about that?
I'm not sure what you mean do this, right? That's the bit I don't understand what you're asking me.
Okay. Look at a design which had air change rates and pressures and things on it and say, okay, there is something not right with this, I am going to change it.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. And in fairness to you, I think what you have in mind may be that someone in your team spots this something that doesn't look right and then takes it off to talk to users.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, the other possible person mentioned, one of the other possible people mentioned was Frances Rath. Now, Frances Rath, I think, she's already given evidence, and I don't think she had accepted that she had the expertise to spot that there was something not right about that kind of information. Would you agree?
She might not have the expertise to spot that the actual detailed design of that single vent system. But like me, she's got the expertise to look at a drawing or a set of information to say, I'm going to comment on that. That doesn't quite look as if it's right. And she might miss that as well, but she would use her NHS.
So you think she would have the ability to spot things like incorrect air change rates or incorrect pressures?
No, but yeah, when we've already been to a meeting and we've been told this is the iterative process, we've been told that's what that unit's getting. So then we have that conversation, drawings are updated, and it comes back to us and we go, well, they said it was going to be 10, but there's only 5 here. So she's not picking what it should be. We're commenting on things that we now see that we didn't hear before. So that's why we keep using the word comment. So we're not checking the design, we're just checking that what they told us has actually happened. That's generally what we're doing.
Okay, well, I'm not sure I entirely follow that.
Right,
And I can see if somebody says in a meeting, you're going to get 10 air change rates in this room, and then they give you a drawing showing 5, then you're going to go, what? You just told me yesterday it was 10. But if you're been in a user group which has focused on things like the medical gases, for instance, the more technical needs of a child cancer patient or whatever, but not air changes or pressures in the room, and then you're given a drawing which has these on it, would Frances Rath have the skills to say, whoa, this is not right?
She's got the skills to say, this isn't what you told me.
Well, that would assume that someone had told her beforehand.
Moved on a bit. We're doing user group meetings, and you talked about previously, not today, before, the parallel universe, right? And the parallel universe is the other bit, the M&E design actually getting done, which should match what's happening in the user group meetings. And then there's a coming together of the designers who, let's just take water. So the designers don't need me or anybody else to say we need a water system, it needs tanks, it needs a distribution system, and it needs an outlet system. right? So they'll be busily doing that whilst we're all at user group meetings, and then we move on to the next bit. So we've had the user group meetings, we know it's a 28 bedded ward, you've got 28 taps or whatever it is, and we come to the more technical meeting, and they tell us technical stuff about the water, right? You've got all the taps, we've not picked the valves yet, etc., etc. But here's what we're giving you, and she can see every room's got water, every ensuite's got water, etc. There's basins, all that stuff. She's generally checking all that, and that's the stuff that she has seen fed into this meeting. And then after this meeting, which is a kind of general meeting, they then move on to a more detailed meeting where they're telling us their intended design solution. And what they're asking us is, how does that look? Does that look reasonable? And that's maybe the best word for it. We're saying that looks reasonable, yes. And we even get further than that, as I've said in my statement. We get to status A. And status A means go and construct it. But status A does not mean, absolutely does not mean that we've just said we approve that drawing. We're saying we've got no further comment to make in that drawing. And it looks like what you were expressing to us at the previous M&E meetings. Now, if I follow that through, I might come off water and go into vent when something special comes in. And I've just said to you, that's when we would maybe bring in a specialist, and we brought in Capita for the PPVL rooms, and they looked at it in detail. So I've got a team of folk who are competent enough to look at what they've been told is actually getting played out. And if it's not, we'll comment. You could even miss it, but at the end of the day, I'll go back to the first principles. It's still ZBP that's responsible for designing a design that's compliant for healthcare.
Well, let me see if I can understand this.
I'm not there then, right?
Sorry?
I'm saying I've not got you there. No.
No,
Right,
you haven't,
okay.
I'm afraid.
All right, let's go for it.
You've done your user group meetings. Stop. You're in more detailed M&E discussions. Okay?
Right, I mean, sorry, just so that I'm keeping up. This scenario assumes maybe 3 user group meetings.
Yeah, so it's not a the question oversimplifies it because it assumes there's a user group meeting followed by something else, which we know because in a number of cases there were more than one user group meeting about a particular area. What I'm trying to do is to move the witness away from the user group meetings into meetings that were not titled user group meetings. This witness, my lord, has said that he expected certain things to happen in the user group meetings, which didn't, it would appear, happen from what we've been told. So I'm moving into a different area now.
Right.
So let's talk about stick to ventilation for the moment.
Okay.
And let's stick to things like air changes per hour and pressure gradients. A bit like the point you made about the airlock, which infers, in fact, it's said to be for positive pressure. I accept your point. If Frances Rath is told, you're getting an airlock to keep the positive pressure in, and then she's shown something that doesn't show that, she puts her hand up and says, where's it going? If Frances Rath is shown information about Ward 2A, which shows ordinary bedrooms with chilled beams and 2.5 air changes an hour, are you saying she has the skills to say, stop, this can't be right? Or does that alert her? Because I suspect she would say she doesn't. So I just want your view on it.
Well, it alerts her because, as I said previously, Frances Rath sat with Emma's team, and agreed the ADB sheets, which has got some of this information on it. Frances Rath, for my team, was the holder of the room RDSs, the room data sheets. So Frances Rath would have information to say to them, you said 40 litres per second here, but you've actually only got 4. Right? And right, so okay, so that's a comment. Now that does not put Frances Rath in the frame for, I've changed that design. It only puts Frances Rath in the frame for, I've advised them they've got this wrong. That's what my team were doing.
But apart from Mr. Hall says he didn't do it. Frances Rath doesn't seem to recognise doing it, although you feel she could have done it. Anyone else that could have done that job?
Peter Moyer, clearly, yeah.
Did you tell Frances Rath that the ventilation system was compliant with guidance?
No, what ventilation system? The
hospital.
single rooms.
Yes.
No, Francis Rath knew the same as me that it was 40 litres per second.
Well, that's not quite the same question.
Oh, sorry, well, what was, sorry, my apologies, what was the question, sorry?
She seems to think that you told her that the hospital's ventilation system was compliant with guidance.
When? No, don't think so.
No, I don't have a date. No?
Don't think so.
Well, let's just, so we don't leave this hanging any more than we need to, just make sure we go through what you've said in your witness statement about this topic. That really starts on page 152. So we'll go back to the bits we haven't touched on. 152 for the moment. And there's various comments. And then in 153, you say that your main involvement was with some of the initial discussions. And then the process continued with the overall progress seen by Peter Moore and David Hall, with the technical detail managed by Francis Rath. So you really have Francis down as the person in charge of technical detail, is that right?
In 2007, the chief executive, or Helen Byrne, maybe it wasn't the chief executive, gave me Francis Rath, who for me was the capital project leader in the Southern General Site, who'd done many, many projects. I think she's a building surveyor to profession, and it was given to me to be my building services, not expert, because she's not an expert, my building services person for this project.
In that paragraph there, you produce a list of people. She's supported by Mary McLeod, Heather Griffin, Jackie Stewart, Fiona McCluskey, Eleanor McCall, John McGarity, and you say they were reviewing design and compliance of ventilation systems or not?
A whole range of systems. So if you take Eleanor McCall, she's IT, right. Massive IT. So she would definitely be getting our IT guys who are experts to say this is compliant.
Are any of them reviewing ventilation, air change rates and pressures?
Well, not in terms of rate, in terms of what they expect. So as we've talked, Francis Rath would know that a single room is getting 40 litres per second. Yeah, in terms of that, nodding to that. Yep, that's what's in the drawing. That's what I'm expecting to see. Yep.
Yeah, does she know what 40 litres a second is in air changes?
I can't answer for that, but she knows 40 litres per second is what we've agreed. So as long as she sees it, it's on the RDS, it's on the ADB sheet, it's in the environmental matrix. I can't be the only one that's reading these, surely.
If we go to 155, this is just to make sure that we get the distinction you're making correctly, because this is where Mr. Hall was very keen to make a distinction for us. You say about halfway down that page, the project team's role was limited to clinical and operational functionality, i.e. the end user requirements. This did not include approving technical specifications or technical compliance, which was always the responsibility of Brookfield and no one else. Now, that seems reasonably clear. So if you want to build a ward which complies for cancer patients with what SHTM says for cancer patients, you're saying the team were not reviewing that? That was for Brookfield?
That's for Brookfield for the technical design, yeah.
And then you go on to say it was the contractor, as in the building contract, who had full responsibility to ensure that all compliance technically was achieved, which would be finally confirmed at testing, commissioning, oblique validation prior to acceptance. I'll just pause there just to see if we get rid of validation as an issue. You obviously know, do you know what validation is?
Yeah.
Can you just give us a thumbnail of what validation is as opposed to, say, commissioning?
Well, I would expect, I would expect in validation of any system that it's been designed, it's been built, it's getting tested and commissioned, right? And the performance of that is logged. And then I would expect that the client, and I know it's done different contracts, the client on, let's call it critical systems, let's have medical gas, water, ventilation, the client would do a independent validation process of what that's delivering. And that's us, just let's step into the PPVL room. Differential pressures. A simple smoke test with a smoke stick will show you the flow of air going from the anteroom, that's a lobby, to the bedroom, to the ensuite. So quite simple. You may also, microbiologists may also want to put plates down to check contaminants in the air. They may actually want to take a specimen of the air through one of the anemometers or whatever. That's speed, that's not the right word. So validation is carried out by the client in the period called operational commissioning. And that's the period between practical completion and service day one.
And what you said, you use the phrase in your witness statement, prior to acceptance.
Yeah.
And that's because presumably you validate to see whether you can accept it.
After practical completion, no.
Right.
So it's actually, so if actually practical complete, it might be partial, but it's happened, and then you're doing validation. And before, it's actually, I call it something else. I call it pre-occupancy testing, right? Because that's the important thing. So validation, you would do validation. The DMA report, for example, excellent idea, super idea, done the validation. Nobody done it with that, but that was a perfect example. And in that report, it clearly said, it didn't say don't move in, but it did say fix these things reasonably urgently. However, in a job I'm connected with at the minute, big job, similar size, validation actually starts before let's talk air handling units. Air handling unit arrives, the validator comes in to see that it's there, it's got all its bits. Air handling unit's connected up, he comes back to see that. Air handling unit commissioned, he comes back. So he's actually doing a trail of validation, and then finally he'll go to the room it's serving to make sure it's providing the performance parameters that it's supposed to provide.
Well, let's go back to where we got to before we became slightly diverted into the approval processes. Go back to 145, please. And we'll just see if there's anything else we need to pick up. To some extent on 145, we're still talking about the ventilation derogation because we'd asked you about the ZBP paper and when you first saw that, so I won't go back into there. And then we continue on to the question of, well, who did you tell? And your position is you told Helen Byrne and that was all you needed to do, is that right?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
And you've already been asked about infection control involvement, so we won't ask you about that again. Just in terms of one practical point, because you emphasized it earlier, on page 148, you take the view that if somebody's going to do a risk assessment, that's for the technical advisors to do before they give you the advice on the topic. That's your position on that. And then you say, well, and by the way, before any patients go in here, somebody's going to check it anyway. Now, if you were checking whether the bed was a type X or a type Y to suit a particular patient, orthopedic or whatever it was, that's fine, because if you go in before occupation and say, wrong type, get me the right one. But we've had quite a lot of evidence which basically says you need to get your ventilation right at the start, because fixing it later becomes a complete nightmare because it affects the built structures in a whole variety of ways. Would you agree?
Well, and that's what I've just described in this other job I'm connected to at the minute, where the ventilation engineer comes in all through the install process, and he gets I've read his reports, he gets a great idea on just how good this system is right up until after practical completion, before patient occupancy, and then he does his performance testing and say, well, I've checked all that, all the bits are there. I'm going to check it performance-wise, should be okay, or it is okay, or it isn't okay. So that's a complete process of validation.
I just wondered what you thought of this idea. One of the other witnesses, when asked, can you think of anything that might help, suggested that one possibility might be that you have whatever discussions you have about the design of your ward, including ventilation and everything else, But then when you finish the design process, before you start, as it were, pouring the concrete, you'll loop back through some official process to the users and bring in lots of advisors and say, just before we go, are we all okay with this?
Yeah.
What do you think of that idea?
I think that's an excellent idea. I think there's another way of achieving it, and that's by traditional, traditional design, like Monkland's currently is designed to the nth degree. So you've actually done every single thing. But even then, before they say go, they'll go. Is that still okay? So in terms of your point, I totally agree.
Yeah. So am I understanding from your answer that in Monklands it's not a design and build
No.
contract, it's a traditional client does the design, gives it to the contractor and says build it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the only difference I think, I don't want to get this wrong, the builder is with them doing the design as well. Okay, so there's a buildability issue. So the builder's there, the designer's there, and the client's there, and they've taken it to, I don't know, stage 5 or 6 in the RIBA process. I'm not quite sure, but they've done a lot of design on it before they ever go and start to build it. But the the contractor's already picked. Right.
Okay.
I'm quite interested in, as Mr. Connell has flagged, we are interested in suggestions from appropriately skilled people such as yourself. So Mr. Connell put to you the possibility of a return. You go through the design process, but you then return to the result, and you have a formal process that reviews it. And as I understand your answer, you said that's a good idea.
Absolutely.
Then you said, but another good idea is to follow the model which is in course of being adopted in Monklands or has been.
Yeah, but there's some downsides to that, my lord. You know, Monkland's been designing a hospital for 10 years, so there's a long lead to get there. Now it's not all about design before they start phoning me up. But that makes, when you're trying to fit in government in terms of, say, cash flows and stuff like that, that's a long lead in. That's why design and build come out. But normally before design and build, we would have done traditional designs, and that would design everything, bill of quantities, every nut and bolt. Nobody would be any doubt of what we would actually ask for until the users change, of course. But there you go.
Right. Well, it's just so that I have followed, as it were, the Monklands model, which you are commending.
Yeah, it's got its downside, but yeah, now considering where I am now, it's the only model I would probably do, yeah.
So what are the key features of what I'll describe as the Monkland model?
Everybody's agreeing the detail, and I mean everybody, the contractor, the designer, and the client, as you go along. So there's no doubt about no doubt about information, no doubt about communication, no doubt about what you're designing.
And how do you achieve that?
By working together and getting into the very nitty gritty of every single design, every room, every system, so nothing's left to chance. That doesn't mean it all go right, but that's the philosophy behind it.
Am I right in understanding that one of the issues with the traditional model, where the client works out exactly in every detail what he wants and tells the builder to build it, is the point you made about lead time, particularly in the context of healthcare, where by the time you go into next week, somebody's come up with some new machine or new device or new process or whatever. Healthcare moves rapidly, and the construction process may struggle to keep up.
Yeah.
Is that one of the issues over that?
Absolutely is, yeah. And one of the other things is, in these very long processes, so start procurement, do some design, construct and finish it, 4, 5, 6 years. A lot of the personnel, particularly on the user side, have changed and get different views, and that's where change comes in. So and nobody really wants change. You've seen change in 4B, so change in a contract is always, apart from being expensive, always difficult.
Can I ask you about another topic, the full business case? Now, we asked somebody to dig their way through the entire massive document.
No luck.
Exactly. I don't know what they did to deserve that, but we asked somebody to do it anyway. The information we have is this, and I just need to know because you were involved in the full business case and putting that up to Scottish Government, weren't you?
Yeah, yes, sorry, yes, I was.
Is that if you read the full business case, you would not know that guidance like SHTM was not going to be filled. Is that probably correct?
Yep, absolutely correct.
And you wouldn't find, at least as far as we've been able to find, let's call it the ventilation derogation for the moment,
Sure.
the ventilation change mentioned in the full business case.
No, you wouldn't find that, no.
And the decision to change the nature of the advice available to the project team, i.e. the stepping down of the Curry and Brown team, probably not there either.
Definitely not there.
Why are none of these things in it? Can you help us at all?
The business case is about selling something to the government who's buying something. So I'm not quite sure whether the Curry and Brown change would enhance that or whatever. And the derogation has become a normal part of what we're buying. And we're not saying, well, remember, it's your word, the derogation, my word's the alternate design. We're not saying this is a problem. We're just saying we're moving through this. So it's just simple, practical steps.
Can I just, I've been asked for reasons that are not primarily directed at you, just to check something. We had some discussion in another session of the inquiry in which Appendix K to the full business case was mentioned. Can I just ask for bundle 17 at 1453, please? Well, it's come up and disappeared again. It purely, somebody raised the question was, what on earth is Appendix K to the full business case? Is everybody clear as to what that is? And it is a design statement. There's a design statement about buildings and there's a design statement about other parts, landscape and so on. And that's what Appendix K is. So we're all clear about that. Do you remember this being put together as part of the package?
It's the outcome of the work in 2010.
Thank you. Well, we can take that down. Thanks very much. In the next page of your witness statement, you're talking about the role of IPC. We've already dealt with that. And then you go on to the appointment of the main contractor. And then we come back to design again. So let's not go there again. So let's move on to page 156 of your witness statement. Actually, let me ask you about another topic,
Okay.
just while I have it in my head. We understand that the board keeps a risk register. Now, we don't actually have it in our published documents yet. But was there also a project risk register?
Yeah, there was. Excuse me. We had a project risk register, and the board had the risk register, and we had a corporate risk register. And as we went through our gateway review process, which is something that might be built into this design process, because it doesn't actually deal with design, even though you think it should. In the gateway process, they were very anti us having 3 risk registers, and said that the board had to move forward with 1, which is really impractical. So we really ended up with 2, a kind of corporate one with the top 5 risks for the board to look at for every service they provide, and then we had 1 for the project and the wider aspects of the project, say, i.e. the Southern General. So That takes it to, it doesn't go into finite detail because it's up at this kind of level.
Okay, can I, just so we know what we're looking at for people who are not familiar with it, can I have bundle 43, volume 6, at document 37, please? So this is the kind of thing that you see. This is the project risk register in June 2010. Now, if we can scroll down and find risk 24, please. Right. I suppose that the question I have, am I right in thinking that you talk about people owning risks, and as project director, do you own the risks on the risk register that we're looking at the moment?
Most of them, yeah, so see, yeah. Yep.
So we see, for instance, risk 24, risk inadequate full business case design, and then controls in place, and so on. So is that was one of your risks? There's nothing in there about the derogation at all.
It wouldn't be. It's dealing with all the design as one component.
Could we also look at bundle 43, volume 7? This is really just so we get the information in. Can we have document 48 and then risk 11? We're not getting document 48. Well, the reference is obviously incorrect. Let's leave that one. It doesn't matter for my purposes. Let me ask you another random question just while we're off your witness statement just for a moment, arising from something that someone else told the inquiry. Now, in this case, it's Mary Ann Kane, and she came into a position of head of estates, and that turned out to have responsibilities for water that she hadn't quite understood.
Sure.
She explained to us that she had, and she recalls speaking to you at around that time. According to her evidence, you told us something along the lines of the new hospital would have the best water and ventilation systems in Europe, given all the work on compliance. Do you remember telling her that?
Not really, but I would say it was true. That's certainly how I would feel, yeah, at the time.
So, what would be your basis for saying that?
It's a conversation. Mary Ann came into the project at certain times to do certain things, particularly in an area we call cause and effect, which is the cause and effect of all the systems integrated together, coming out with the right results. So fire particularly. So Mary Ann was a nominated fire officer, I think, at that point, and we would have conversations. And I'll answer that. I don't even know why she would say that, because she's maybe having problems with water events somewhere else. And I would say it because why would I expect any less?
Yeah, I just want to ask you one question, going back to your witness statement for the moment. You've been asked a number of questions about the specialised wards. Now, 2A is the one we've been looking at, 4B might be another. There are obviously other special areas, such as theatres and so on and so forth. What did you understand the guidance to be in relation to these? Was that covered by your derogation or not?
No. Only six air changes to 3.
So anything that might be in guidance as requiring more than that, not touched?
Absolutely not confused.
Okay. We'll make some comments about Capita's role, but we've already dealt with that. Now, I'm waiting for the surprise, because on page 158, you are asked about mistyped carbon filters. What we know is that odour was an issue which was raised at the time the project was being discussed, and that the initial response was, not a problem, we'll put carbon filters in. Now, you, I think in your witness statement, say you don't really remember much about the carbon filters. Are you now about to tell me something that isn't in your witness statement?
I'm about to give it, but having listened and read what I can, not want to come here and not be able to answer the question. I know a bit more about it, and reflecting on the beginning of the project, I referred to earlier on, Susan Logan's design statement solution said the perceived odour. It also said make sure when you're doing something like carbon filters, you don't restrict the airflow. Move it on a bit in terms of people speaking to me living and working the site. I pass the site every day of the week of my life now. I don't think there's an issue with odour. A couple of people, some people might. Multiplex clearly didn't think there was an issue with odour, and they said, why don't we remove the carbon filters? And one of the key issues behind it was that they might slow up the airflow, because I think you've seen that we're all brilliant at maintenance. If the maintenance of these filters isn't done promptly and every time it should be done, then we'll have even less air in the building. So that was part of it. And then getting back to the bit that I said to you at the very beginning, 2 bidders of the 3 bidders said we're not putting carbon filters in.
Right.
But at that point in time, I could consider that because I was well out of the procurement process. So that was a general range of stuff that I can remember.
Okay, so initially they were there, and you say it was Multiplex's idea to take them out?
Yeah, it's part of the, what do you call it, the VE process, the value engineering process, which every project has.
And it saves you money, why? Because
It saves you money in
engineering is about saving
capital,
money.
saves
Sorry.
you money and...
Just pause a
sorry.
second. This is my fault. I cut across the start of your answer. I was just saying to you, value engineering is about saving money on a project. You were about to give me an answer, but I'm afraid I spoke and you spoke. So I need you now to return to the start of your answer, if you don't mind.
In terms of carbon filters, you'd be using more energy, more cost. You would have... So yeah, in terms of energy and cost, you'll definitely have on lesser cost and better energy use going forward without them, right? Do they do a job? Yes, they do a job, but you've got to keep up with them, no doubt about it.
Was it at that point influenced by any view as to whether there was or was not an odour problem? Because there have been different views on it.
I think that's what brought it to the table, yeah.
Now, on page 159, one of the issues that you're asked about is, how the decision-making was structured, who was responsible for what, how it all worked. So I wonder if you can just bear with me while we look at 1 or 2 documents just to help us with this.
Okay.
If we look at, sorry, let me start the question. There's something called a performance review group. You know what that is?
Yeah, subgroup of the board, yeah.
Subgroup of the board, yep. Now, what we're just going to work through is one of the decisions made by the performance review group. So could we have bundle 34, please? I think I'm told it's page 147. Now, what we're going to here is a review group meeting on the 19th of May 2009. Just take that date from me if you mind for the moment. At which point the decision was made to amalgamate 2 bodies so that you could get on with the project. And if you see in 2.3 on that page, I'll just read it to you. In considering how best to take this forward, it has been agreed that the new South Glasgow Hospitals and Laboratory Project Executive Board, a lovely mouthful, and the Procurement and Finance Group should merge to become one group. the new South Glasgow Hospitals and Laboratory Project Executive Board, which I might just call the Executive Board from now on.
Sure.
So, and then it said 2.4, amended terms of reference are attached, together with proposed membership, and then 2.5, Director of Acute Services, etc., will chair. So if we then go on to 152, do you remember all this happening?
Yeah, well, bits of it, yeah, bits of it.
As you can see, this is then headed terms of reference for this new renamed sort of body, the Executive Board. And what it says there is that you see at the start that body will have delegated authority to make executive decisions on critical points in the project program. So that, at least at that stage, seems to be where the responsibility sits with the Executive Board.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yeah, generally, yeah, yeah.
And well,
No, I do agree, yeah.
yep, okay, thank you. And about halfway, maybe a little more than that down the page, the board, Executive Board, will oversee the management of change control procedures. And any change which impacts upon the project must be authorised by this board before it can be implemented. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that ever being done? Changes being brought to that board for agreement?
And you asked me, did I remember? The reason I remember is because I probably wrote it and wrote the change. And the change is about changing service, and the change is about changing cost and changing programme. It's generally not about technical issues.
All right.
So if you take example 4B change to BMT, that's that. The concern from government, the concern from the board, the concern from everybody always is that the service makes a change during the project. And so we talked about projects with great longevity. That was always happening. And we can see here 4B was a change, not very successful in the end, and that's a fact. So that was about cost and programme. The two most two areas of the two criteria you really got to control, because programme extensions of time at £500,000 a week are very expensive, etc., etc. So that's what that's about, service change.
Okay. And the reference to having delegated authority in the middle of the page to conduct and conclude negotiations at project critical moments. From one view, that might include signing the contract.
Yeah, it's after that.
Yeah.
I can't say it's not.
Okay, well, can we then, we're trying to understand how this all works. Were you a member of this group, the Executive Board?
Yeah, well, I reported to it, so I suppose I was an attendee.
Okay, let's scroll on and see if it tells us anything else about membership.
There was that many groups. I might have been, but I think I reported to this one, I'm not sure.
Can we go on to the next page, please? It says voting members. So Helen Burns on this, Mr. Calderwood,
yeah.
And then we see you,
Yeah, so sorry,
Mr. McIntyre, and so on and so forth. Jane Grant in her then position, Mike Baxter from the Scottish Government, and then non-voting members, which include technical team members and Peter Moyer. So this, of course, is May. So this is before any of the changes. So you appear to be a member of this.
Yes, I see.
Yeah, okay. This group that has the job of conducting and concluding negotiations. Can we go to another document then? Bundle 42, Volume 2, page 87, please. This is a minute of a meeting of the Executive Board. Just if you take that from me, we can go back to the start if you want, but
no, that's fine.
Just take it from me that's what that is. On the 7th of December 2009. So before all these, last few days discussions about contract details, but getting close to that. And you remember from the last document, it appeared that the Executive Board had the job of concluding negotiations on critical points. But what we see here, it appears, is that they're not doing that because the project team are doing that. If you look at 5 key actions, AS, that's presumably you,
Yes.
reported the project team were now in the process of carrying out due diligence, reviewing the board's employer's requirements against Brookfield's tender to conclude the formal contract document.
Yeah.
So can you help us as to why the issue of, doing these critical negotiations went from the executive board down to the project team?
Well, I just think they obviously thought we were the best people to do it. So that would be a bit of work that fitted into another bit of work that they were probably doing. So we're all doing bits to try and get the whole thing together, I think. Don't really not get anything other to say than that. I'm just trying to read on to see if it gives me a clue. But
No. If there's something else you want to look at, then I'm happy for you to do that. But that's really what you say in your witness statement is that apart from the general rules that the board had about how much people at a particular level could authorize in money terms, and perhaps apart from what we see in these minutes, that there weren't any particular rules put in place as to what had to be reported and where it had to be reported.
Generally, excuse me, generally, and I know this becomes a headline, but generally we would report compensation events that had an effect on the target price.
So that's the kind of thing that you would anticipate reporting up to the executive board.
That's critical, yeah.
Okay. And I've been asked to ask you about that because some participants in the inquiry are particularly interested in the Horn Taps saga.
Yeah.
Now, in your witness statement at page 161, if we could go back there, please. Thank you. What you're doing in this section of your evidence is you're saying, well, I'm trying to explain to you how we decided what we needed to go to the executive board on, what we didn't. Technical things didn't.
Oh, yeah, I know.
And then you say a good example of something technical that doesn't need to get reported to the executive board is the issue about the selection of the Horn Taps. Now, I suppose that the question that I need to ask you about, just because of the background to that decision, is that I think I'm right in saying that even in 2012, when this was being discussed, because 2014 on taps, you weren't gone. 2012, was there not an issue about people dying in Northern Ireland due to flow straighteners or something of that kind?
I think it was a special care baby unit in Belfast. Yeah, there was an issue with, don't really recall the detail, but flagged up to us by Health Facilities Scotland. And I think Fiona McCluskey, I'm sure about Jackie Stewart, probably both of them, had a conversation with HFS and Belfast to make sure any decision we were going to make kind of took account of that. I think it was Pseudomonas, wasn't it? I thought we'd actually taken account of what was flagged to us, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the question, put simply, is this: if you're dealing with a topic which has possible serious health implications and having to make a decision as to what to do against that background, would that not be the kind of matter that should be reported up for discussion at the executive board?
You can maybe say that now, but at that point in time, I would have taken it to the executive board if I couldn't pick it up. If you read all the stuff leading to that, it was very time pressured, and that's not an excuse, it was. So if I couldn't have found a result for that, then probably I took it up because it would have affected the programme, which would have had potential costs on it. But generally, as long as we had done a reasonable risk assessment, and I'm sure MD, and I think we did, I'm sure if MD thinks we could have done more, then that's always the case. But we've done a reasonable risk assessment. We spoke to the right people. We had infection control and nursing involved. and we come up with a solution, and we thought that was a good solution. And then in 2014, Health Services Scotland gets everybody together to review that decision. The taps are bought, agree with that, and they decide, no, fine, we can run with these. So I felt my decision was ratified.
At the time you made the decision in 2012, after the investigations that you've explained to us, were you aware that in order to protect against the issues that had been identified, there would need to be a pretty stringent maintenance regime for the taps?
Mm-hmm.
And did you take any steps to make sure that that was clear to everybody?
I think, as you see in my statement, I spoke to Mr. Powry for ongoing maintenance of this particular tap. But in terms of this particular tap, which would be in theatres, intensive care, coronary care, special care, not special care, that's maternity, PICU, paediatric intensive care, etc. This tap could be taken off and put on for maintenance at the drop of a hat without disturbing anybody, and hence not having to take panels off, potential risk, etc., etc. So I think we took account of just about everything in order to say this is the best solution considering all that we know.
Thank you. We have a few more. What we need to do, the way we operate here, Mr. Seabourne, as you may have noticed if you've been watching any of the full sessions, is that I ask you as many questions as I can immediately think of, and then we kind of take a short pause to see whether, well, first of all, I suddenly realise I've not asked you something, or anybody else has a burning question they want you to answer. But can we go to 162 on your witness statement now? In fairness, the questioner is asking you about something which took place ultimately after you had left, because you left in July 2013.
Uh-huh.
Can I ask you generally, the original Ward 4B,
Uh-huh.
so which was hemato-oncology,
Mm-hmm.
do you agree that that was a specialised area not covered by the ventilation derogation?
100%, yeah.
Now, I think you indicate that you were aware this was, well, I'll put words in your mouth a little bit. This was a Jennifer Armstrong project or Jennifer Armstrong idea. You mentioned her specifically in the middle of page 162.
Yeah.
Do you know what was going to happen sorry, let me start that question again. When the original 4B output specification was produced,
Yeah.
laws or not, the output specification, clinical output specification, indicated a significant range of protective measures to protect the immunocompromised people in that ward. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was a reasonable COS, yeah.
Yeah. Under the proposal to bring the BMT unit in, do you know what was going to happen to the people who were currently scheduled to occupy 4B, the 4B occupants before that decision? Because we haven't been able to trace at the moment any discussion about what was happening about moving their protective environment to somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anything about that?
No, as you know, I just left at that point, and I maybe did take the odd paper to the board. I think there isn't a paper appended. When I say the board, the performance review group, just to be clear. I think there's a paper appended from Jennifer and Jane Grant, which comes with my paper, just because it slots into the agenda at that particular time. Will we do this project? What are the needs to do this project? But I never actually seen the bit where the patients who were going in there, where they were going. And I think I say in my statement to you, I think Ward 1C is just a general ward. And that's because I didn't have any knowledge of that.
No, the reason I ask, and it's in case you can help us any further at all, is this, that if you assume for the moment you've got 4B, which is hemato-oncology, you've got 4C, it's a general ward, you're going to move the people from 4B into 4C. On the face of it, that requires you to reproduce the protective environment in 4C. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Now, 2A, let's come to 2A. We've touched on this to some extent, and I think you've accepted that 2A was another specialist area not covered by the ventilation derogation.
Council unit, yeah.
And when you answer the questions on this, you, I think, say in the middle of 164, so we get that up on the screen for you. So that's page 48 of your hard copy if you need it.
Yeah, I've got it.
You asked, well, did they get what they wanted in 2A? And you say, I'm gone by then. Sorry. And then you say you would assume that all tests, including validation, were carried out. So you would be assuming back in 2013, as a project manager, that validation of an area like that would be carried out before occupancy.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Now, the reason I just want to pause a second, we have talked about validation, but you're saying, oh, absolutely. But yet, no one, well, first of all, no one on the contractor side seems to have had in mind that there was going to be a period during which somebody was running checks, which might come back with an answer saying not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And validation wasn't carried out at all. Now, is this something you would have discussed with Mr. Loudon, the need for validation? Or would you just assume he would know about it?
No, I wouldn't discuss that with Mr. Loudon at all, no. No in 2013, absolutely not.
And why is that? It's just you've too much
It's just too far away at that stage. Right? Oh. I would expect him to take over from me and get to, it's another stage in the job, it's another critical stage, commission, test, validate, and for him to put the plans in place in order to carry out the validations that are required.
But 2A we've been using as an example when we've been discussing the design process, and you've been asked a few more questions about that. It's probably quite a good example just to pause on just for a second while we have you here, that 2A, you say absolutely clear, not covered by the derogation. We asked Mr. Pardey, well, here's an ordinary room in 2A with 2.5 air changes or 40 litres a second. How did that happen? And he says, well, maybe we didn't interpret it correctly. He thinks the user groups might have removed the airlock. Do you think that's likely?
Don't know how. Well, it wasn't there in the first place.
No.
I don't know how they could remove it. And as I say, go back to the COS. It's the one outstanding thing in the COS. It says we need an airlock. Yeah. And if ZBP or hospital designers, they've at least got to ask the question: are we keeping that airlock? Or are we not? Do they need it? Like, even bearing in mind we're only putting 2.5 air change. I mean, it should just have been a flag to say, let's check this out.
Because as you quite rightly said, the logical reason for the airlock is to keep the pressure in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let me just double check that to see whether it's mentioned.
You could have had one or two things. You could have had the rooms at 10 air changes and high pressure get into a corridor that wasn't covered by an airlock, or you could have had, and that might not have been perfect, but I mean, a lot better than what they've got, or you could have had the 10 air changes get into a lobby that's probably kept at 4 or 5 pascals, and that would be a whole system. So it's kind of a partial system versus a whole system, but they actually kind of ended up with the worst. They had no airlock and the wrong air changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm just checking, given I'd slightly unfairly be asking about this without showing you the document. So take it from me that what it actually says, the ward should be accessed by entry through a double door barrier system, which allows the entire ward area the benefit of low positive pressure ventilation. So that the existence of a reason for the airlock, and I'm calling it an airlock, it's not.
So
it's just what people call it rather than a technical description. Yeah. From your understanding of the people on the user group, is it likely in your view that user group members would have said, now take that airlock out? Does this seem to fit with your understanding of how they...
Somebody, I can't know, I don't remember, I've had a lot of conversations, not swapping evidence, just having conversations for the past 6 months to come here. And somebody said that the clinicians at York Hill wanted the same as I'd built them at York Hill, right? And I don't think that had an airlock. So I'm not saying they did, but it's the only piece of rational evidence that I can think of that might have caused this to happen. Right? That from a user perspective as opposed to a design perspective.
So am I right in understanding from your last answer that you were a participant in the building of the Schiehallion unit ventilation system in York Hill?
Yeah, I was a project director, yeah.
And am I right in understanding that advice was taken on that from various sources, including overseas?
Not so sure about overseas.
Right.
It was a big refurb as opposed to a new build, so you had to compromise and adapt to get to things that you thought were the best, environments for the patients. I can't remember what those were, but it didn't have I just know it didn't have a corridor which was airlocked. Positive it didn't.
Well, this raises this slightly...
Sorry, could you just give me that again? It didn't have a corridor that was...
No, unless I don't think I had an airlocked corridor. That we're thinking should be here, in terms of the barrier door. So we think there's going to be a corridor that's controlled. I don't think that Schiehallien's got that. I'm sure it's not got that in York Hill, but for me, that's 25 years ago. And in terms of your reference point about overseas, don't remember that, but Professor Gibson, worldwide known, so and you didn't do a project without Brenda throwing her heart and soul into it, so she may have asked somebody of you, and that's maybe where that comment comes from. I'm kind of guessing.
But it wouldn't be an area with what you might describe as standard ventilation
No.
at that time.
No.
It does raise a question, I suppose, just as it were by the back door, of how a design for Ward 2A's air changes and chill beams and all these other issues got to where it was,
Yeah,
when, among other things, the person who built the Schiehallien's refurbed version was on the team.
Well, yeah, but it would have been 6 air changes as opposed to 10, so it still wouldn't have been right. It might have been a little bit better, right? So.
Sorry, it may entirely my fault. I don't quite understand that last answer. It would have been 6 air changes rather than 10.
I think Mr. McConnell was saying to me that if we hadn't changed to 3 years, just call it 3, if we hadn't changed to 3 air changes, then the mistake would have been carried into Schiehallion as 6, i.e. a normal bedroom, because that's where the 3 comes from. Am I explaining that well enough?
I'm sure it's my fault.
A single room would normally have 6.
Yes.
And in this design process, they thought that was a single room.
Right.
So it would have got 6 air changes. But our delegation changed 6 to 3, and that's why it get 3 air changes. Well, listen, I'm surmising all this, but I think it's a good summary of what's happened.
Okay, and the reason it still wasn't right was the figure ought to have been 10.
Yeah, I think it was 10. I think it should have been 10, yeah. I think unfortunately the description in the RDSs and its description in the matrix just terms it as a single room with overnight stay. And it's nearly, although it's not a lobby PPVL room, it is a kind of isolation room, and it might have been better. It might have been better if that's how it had been designated.
I just want to ask you about the one or two issues about isolation rooms, if I can.
Sure.
Just, can I just divert off that for a moment and ask you, now you left in July 2013. One of the issues that the inquiry has been considering, it's nothing to do with ventilation, it's to do with the water system.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that has arisen is about the filling of the water system before occupancy, perhaps a long time before occupancy. Now, by the time you left, were you aware whether the water system had been filled?
No, I don't think it'd been filled. Excuse me. And if I left in July, if I go back to July 13, sorry, if I go back to 12 November, December, in the adult hospital, we had completed in terms of structure and fit out, intensive care, high dependency, and critical and CCU. So that was there as everybody we came to see the hospital. We showed them this pristine ward, and it was impressive. And there was a discussion about, will we put the services on in it? Right, just a discussion, thousands of discussions, and I think it was Dan Pike and me who was having the discussion, and we both agreed, no, we'll leave that. We're not ready to do that yet. So if I roll on to July, as I was leaving, and you've got to remember, I'm trying to close down things, and people are taking things forward. There was discussion about, can we start testing pipework? But I thought that discussion would be about testing pipework with nitrogen as opposed to wet media, because that's normally what you would do. Nitrogen be a very clean agent. So my simple, sorry, it's a long way to say no. Sorry, apologies.
The point in the witness statement that I reached, which is about 172, we're talking about handover. And I have another question about handover. By the time you left, had you given any thought to what pre-occupation testing was needed on the water that you would need to discuss with David Loudon before, as it were, you went and he took over?
No, I never had that discussion with David. I was only with David for, I think, 4 weeks, 2 of which he took 2 weeks holiday. So I had limited time with David, and I just decided in my head David would need to deal with that. But in terms of, I'm going to move the clock on, in terms of what they did and done that DMA pre-occupation report, you couldn't have done anything. That's gold standard. It's just when it was done, it's something else should have happened. So David obviously got there, or David's team got there and did it. And I can't comment on what happened after that.
Nor am I asking you to do that.
No, I know.
Thank you. But just while we're on that page 172, you are asked the question, what did you tell David Loudon about the ventilation derogation and the log? And you say the derogation wasn't mentioned, as you remember.
No.
So if he needed to work out what he was trying to build, what his output was going to be, he would have needed to find that himself among the papers that he had.
Well, my deputy and everybody else in the team was a conduit to advise David anything he needed to know. So Peter Moyer, I think I said in my statement, that was one of the key linkages. The board didn't do an official induction process. We kind of made up the process as best we could, and Peter was a key part of that process. So of all the things I had to tell David, no, we'd already built some of the systems, we'd already agreed, moved forward. I didn't see that as a risk, but I did know that when it came to testing, people would know what they were testing.
Now, in many ways, the most prominent thing that was attributed to Alan Seabourne in a lot of the exchanges we've seen is the email you sent years after the event.
Yeah.
In 2016.
Feels like an affidavit, but no, it wasn't.
Well, let's just get hold of that, because I need to put it in front of you. Bundle 12, page 813, please. I need to put it to you in part because you now try to give some context to some of the statements you make there. Probably the most prominent one is in the third line where you say, whatever the infection control people say, they were involved in every aspect of the design, and the member of my team responsible for infection control, Annette Rankin, was a person responsible for design, dialogue and evaluation for ensuring appropriate liaison communication was carried out effectively. To this end, infection control and microbiology, along with Annette, were party to the sign-off of all design matters that had an impact on patients, including the environment. Now, am I right in understanding from your witness statement that the inference that that might give, just read on its own, which is that you had IPC people signing things off, is not what you were meaning to say? Is that
No,
right?
I think you've seen my statement that I've kind of clarified that. You know, sometimes you think we've done a good job here and somebody's just knocking it down. And I remember that day well, I was just going to play golf and I wrote that down, and then you showed me it back and I condensed what I described what it actually meant, which was infection control and many others were party to most of the discussions, which I absolutely believe.
Yeah. So let's just go through what you do say, because Annette Rankin says, I didn't sign off anything.
No, she didn't. Said that in my statement.
And you say on page 173, we'll hang on to the document if you don't mind, page on 173, which is 57 of your hard copy, you say at the foot, what I mean is that we were all involved, including infection control, Annette, then Jackie Stewart. Can I just pause and ask, was there a gap when you didn't have somebody there, when one had gone and the other hadn't arrived?
Yeah, Annette went, and I don't know, that's why when we talked about theatre changes, I'm not quite sure when Annette went, but she went quite fast. She was in the project team and then she had another better job and she left. So there was no intention to recruit anybody, but the minute she left, we would then recruit somebody, we recruit somebody internally, but they've still got a job to leave and then they've got a job to go to. So there is a gap, yeah.
So what you say in your witness statement is that the process was set up as a hub and spoke, which is the one, in fact, you say it's not set up by me, but with the board, whereby people had a responsibility to connect with their own departments and get information as required, and that's what we've discussed. So you're not actually saying that either of these individuals signed off on anything, it's just that they were party to the project team's way of working.
Yeah. Just like us, they weren't approving it, they were just party to all the correspondence, information, meetings, etc., etc.
And you provided various names and so on in your email, and then you make the point that we've already covered, that one of the key issues was this 26 degrees point, because that was a key issue. So that's in your email, second paragraph from the bottom.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, you're telling me that general rooms are not at negative pressure. And you say, well, I thought that's what they were contracted to provide, negative pressure. So how was this tested, and so on. I wanted to ask you about how some of these things worked, because there's another issue that links into that a little bit. The inference of IPC being involved in everything that you might take from your email. The isolation rooms for the hospital, they were specified in the employer's requirements as PPVL rooms designed in accordance with HPN Supplement 4 or
04 Supplement 1 or something.
Yep. Now, my understanding is that those requirements were completed and put into the necessary form in April of 2009. If we're talking about isolation rooms and who's involved in what, I wonder if we could look at Bundle 14, Volume 1, page 75. Now, the reason I've put this in is largely to look at the timing, because the ERs are finished in April. Here we are in May. A meeting being held, no doubt for convenience, in the project office, because that's where there's a nice big room you were telling us. And it's the infection control meeting, and it includes Annette Rankin, various others whose names you'll be familiar with. And it says, this meeting is to review the advice given to date by infection control and agree a final position on the new hospital with regard to, and then various topics. First one being isolation rooms. And what the meeting then did was to review a paper that Drs. Redding and Hood had produced with Annette Rankin, and said, fine, this is the position. Isolation rooms, hemato-oncology, sealed ward, HEPA filtration positive to the hospital, respiratory, 3 negative pressure rooms. If we just go on to the next page, renal inpatients, 2 positively pressured rooms, A&E, 2 negative pressure rooms, critical tier 10 isolation rooms, and so on. And then they go on to other topics. Now, the point is simply to try and understand the process, because when we asked ZBP about this, which essentially discusses different types of rooms in different locations depending on the different needs, ZBP go, we know nothing about that. We just got the employer's requirements which said PPVL rooms, so that was what we built. Well, subject to a debate about how they built them, but that's essentially what they built. So is there a kind of disconnect here? Here you've got the IPC people saying, oh, we've been talking about this, let's just finalise it, write it all down, here it is. But you've already basically agreed something else. Can you help us as to how that might have happened?
The PPVL rooms, the number of them, location of them, and the type of them can only come from the users and the clinicians. I've seen this question asked before. And there is an issue about PPVL rooms in that environment. And stuff I've read said that PPVL rooms can do positive and negative pressure in the bedroom. And if it can do positive and negative pressure in the bedroom, then it's got source and protective isolation. So from an engineering background and my background, I would say they look fine. And I think that's what Steve Pardy was generally alluding to. But other folk, I think HFS came in and said, no, you could have other types of rooms. And again, that's opinion. But getting back to your point, the PPVL rooms could only be asked for by the users with infection control. And then when the schedules of accommodation are signed off later in 2010 by the directors, including the medical directors, and for me, that's just information that I've got to deal with. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't know who chose the PPVL rooms. However, in the job I'm connected with at the minute, in the same paediatric cancer unit, they've got 10 PPVL rooms. So it's all about opinion.
Yeah, but we know that the guidance has changed since we were dealing with it there, because one of the issues that we had to take up with ZBP is that the guidance, which is referenced in the employer's requirements, says not for immunocompromised and not for infectious diseases units. So we said to them, well, does that mean you had to think of something else? And there was a discussion about that. I'm just trying to understand. I can understand you say, well, the information must have come from the users, but here we have, it would appear, quite a wide group, people concerned with infection prevention control, talking about different types of protective environments for different patients.
Yeah, but going back to my point, that's the point that I'm trying to get across in the user group meetings, with the architect, the design engineer, and the user. Take my team out, my team were there, but this is going above what their knowledge, and them saying, this is what we want. So we've got 8 of them, and they're all the same, or they're all different. There should be 3 of these or 4. I mean, that's a discussion that should have occurred. And it doesn't actually mean that discussion didn't occur, and that the user said, we'll have 8 PPVL rooms, thank you.
It may raise questions, I suppose, as to whether there was specific IPC involvement, because if we go back to page 75, the membership of that discussion, so 75, you've got a fair group there. You've got Mr. Walsh, you've got your project manager, Heather Griffin, you've got Fiona McCluskey, Annette Rankin, both people connected to your team in various ways, Sandra McNamee, now Divine, and Pamela Ioannidis. So, this is not, a couple of doctors having a chat. This is a pretty wide group.
Top team, yeah. And there's one missing.
Okay.
Is it Penny Redden? Is she missing? Is it mentioned?
No.
Somebody? She in it?
She's not in that list, no.
So Penny in 2008 was really taking the lead on the isolation rooms throughout the hospitals. And it's strange to see why she's not part of this communication.
I suppose the other question might be Heather Griffin's there. She's one of your assistant project managers.
Yeah.
Question as to what skills she had, but we're not getting to hear from her, unfortunately. So this is one of your team is at this meeting, and at least we haven't been able to find a record of someone coming to the project team and saying, "Whoa, hang on a minute, there's an issue about isolation rooms," because I've just been at a meeting where IPC have agreed we should have a whole variety of things, and we've just put it in as one. You can't help us with that.
Good, thanks.
Thank you. For the moment, at least, I just wanted to take you to the end of your witness statement, because as is practice, what the inquiry has tended to do, given that the questioning can arise from a variety of information, some of which may or may not be accurate, may not cover all the grounds, may not hit on the sweet spot of the witness's expertise,
sure,
or any other such thing. So the inquiry usually says, what else could you tell us that might help? So you've then set out quite a long narrative over the next few pages from 179. It's in answer to question 56. Are there any points in what you set out there that, knowing now what you do, you think you should emphasize to the chair?
Let's just take ventilation then. Right. I don't know if you've done this. I know you wrote a summary for Edinburgh, but I can't recall what it said because I'm just back for holiday. Brain's not kicked in yet. I think ventilation like water for any of these refurbs, rebuilds, whatever, should have a ventilation group that oversees anything on any decision on ventilation regarding any particular patient group. I think if they get the right people on that, and I'll say that, I'll caution that to say, it's not often I've seen 2 ICD doctors agreeing at the same time, but never mind, that's just a personal comment of me. So I think that would be very, very helpful indeed to have a group. And I'm sure I've read it somewhere. And the same for water, you've already got that. You've already talked about the stop points, the gateway review, which would say, let's see what we're planning here. We're all agreed. Any disagreement? No, move on. I think that's clearly another thing. And in that process, the Scottish Government or the UK Government's process of gateway review, which I've done 5 of, and generally get 5 gold stars, right? Good for me. But they never really touched on the technical aspects of the job. In fact, Tom Steele was in one of my reviews. I have every highest regard for Tom, and it wasn't his remit to even ask me about derogations or whatever. So that process is there. It could be made a bit more robust. Internal processes for each board, or take it up a level, but I'd keep it board level to say all this design has been considered and we're happy with it, whether it's water, whether it's ventilation, and that kind of applies to medical. In medical gas terms, you install all the medical gases, and guess what? The pharmacy comes out and checks them all that they're all right. So that's kind of in line with that. But medical gases are seen, they're not, but they're seen more critical than water and ventilation systems generally.
The only question I need to ask, because I should have asked you about it when you touched on this earlier, is that I think it was Mr. Fernie of Multiplex, I may be wrong about that, who made this suggestion. He then said, yeah, he made the idea, and then he said, of course, that would introduce an element of delay, because in effect you'd be saying, stop a minute, let's make sure we know what we're doing, check it with the users. Would that be a reason to do it or not do it? Would that affect it?
That would not be a reason not to do it. Definitely not. If we've ended up where we are today, then you need to do it. I think I'm not connected now, but certainly in this country, but I think you've got a group called Assure who do a kind of high level version of that. So on the right tracks, I would say, but yeah, each health board should have the decision point.
Well, this might be an appropriate point to take a short pause.
Well, Mr. Seabourne, as I think has been explained by Mr. Connell, we need to check if there's any other questions in the room, as it were.
All right.
So might take us about 10 minutes. So if I could ask you to return to the witness room.
Certainly, my lord. Thank you.
I think, my lord, I have about half a dozen. The questions are shortish. We'll see whether the answers are.
I understand there's a few more questions.
Thanks, I'm glad of that.
Mr. Connolly.
Thank you. Mr. Seabourne, these are questions which do not have a single theme. They inevitably come from a variety of sources, so please bear with me. I'm jumping around a bit. In your evidence, you were asked about the design of Ward 2A, and then you were taken to the fact that you had a connection with York Hill because you were the project manager on a major refurbishment of the Schiehallion unit at York Hill. You remember that?
Yes.
Now, my right in understanding that your recollection is that York Hill Schiehallion unit did not have an airlock,
I don't think it had an air corridor, no.
because the information I've subsequently been given is that it did have the benefit of an airlock. Would that simply be your recollection?
Similar way, but it would make it more that we should have one now, so yeah.
In the process that was being undertaken in the context of design, a lot of the materials were being recorded on a contractor system called Aconex. Aconex, my apologies. And each drawing was supposed to be stamped A, B, C, or D. Now, your evidence is that your team were reviewing things for clinical functionality. Design liability lay with ZBP. I think the point I've been asked to put to you is this: if you stamp something under Aconex with an A, does that just not mean this is fine, get on and build it?
No, it means we've got no further comment to make on it. And it's in line with what you told us at the previous workshop.
The issue of the full business case was discussed with you, and you accepted that the derogation, if that's the right word, wasn't reported. Now, the inquiry, I'm told, has had some evidence at an earlier session, which I was not involved, from a Mike Baxter of the Scottish Government, who expressed a view that you should report non-compliance with Scottish Government guidance as part of a full business case presentation. Do you remember being told that?
Told me that?
Well, no, told that that was what you should do.
No, I don't ever remember having that level of detail in a discussion about FBCs. And to add a wee bit, not that I want, but I will, Curry and Brown and myself actually took the FBC process and turned it into a kind of logic map for them, which they thought was extremely helpful. And even then, I don't remember being asked to address that issue.
A couple of things about conversations, which you may or may not recall. If so, just tell me.
Okay.
There had been some indication in the evidence, particularly from Francis Rath and from Fiona McCluskey, that you had actually told them, don't look at the environmental data, that's going to be dealt with in these separate discussions. Do you remember doing that?
No, what I said to them was, you're not responsible for design, which was a key concern of most of my team, right? And that's what I said to them. You can participate in this process, you're not responsible for design. You're supporting and helping out.
Again, I'm going back to an earlier discussion. Remember I asked you about a conversation with Mary Ann Kane when you said it would be the best water and ventilation system in Europe because of the work we're putting in compliance. And you said you couldn't remember it, but you might have said that, or you would have said that if somebody had asked. I think you may have said to me that it was just a casual conversation, because I'm being asked, well, on what was your basis for saying it would be the best water system?
because that's what I was planning and hoping for. No other reason than that.
The final question I have for you is really a point of clarification. Could we have the witness statement back, please? It's 153 in the electronic version. If you want your hard copy, it's 37.
37.
37 at the foot of the page. If that's easier to work with. Relatively simple question. You state at the bottom of that page, there had been problems in the past with that's user groups, and hence the service directors were instructed to ensure the membership was appropriate and controlled by them. Can you tell us what these problems were?
Yeah, been to lots and lots of user groups, particularly with clinical people, and many times in the past, user groups would be, sometimes I'd see 3 doctors, and then another 3 would come in, and there was absolutely no control over it. And I'll just say, as I've seen it, the clinical staff thought they could come and go to these meetings whenever they wanted, and when they came to a meeting and didn't like something they saw, they potentially changed what people had been planning. So the senior officers of the health board told the directors of the services, the director of surgery, the director of medicine, etc., that they had to make sure they were comfortable with the people that were going to be in the user groups, and that's right from the beginning right through to the end, and that they didn't change those people. They weren't allowed to change unless the service director agreed. So it was a control point.
And the control that you've just talked about, is that what you put in place?
Yeah, that was probably the best I've seen. Yeah.
I have no further questions, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Seabourne, for your attendance here today. I mean, you've had quite a long day, but behind that, I appreciate a lot of preparation in responding to our questionnaire and reading the material we asked you to read. So in thanking you, I'm not simply recognizing your attendance today, I'm recognizing the work that went behind it. But you're now free to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you.
Now, as legal representatives will remember, we're hoping to begin at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning with Mr. O'Donovan.
Mr. O'Donovan is appearing remotely. We have tested the system. It did appear to work. So we're hoping to be able to deal with his evidence reasonably promptly and then move on to Ms. Byrne later.
Oh, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon, and we'll see each other at 9 o'clock tomorrow.